Okay, let's dive in. Today we're looking at a pretty messy situation involving a private poker game.
Yeah, high stakes.
High stakes, exactly. And it all kind of blew up when someone couldn't cover their debt.
Mm-hmm.
It started, as a game between people who mostly knew each other, but it really exposed that tricky line
Oh, line is that?
between just like informal trust and needing actual clear rules, especially when big money gets involved.
Absolutely. We've looked through some documents, notes on Adam's poker game debt incident, and also this Fat Spaces transcript,
Yeah.
long discussion there.
Right.
And our goal isn't just to tell the story, but to really unpack it. Who were the key people? What really caused the problem?
How did they try to fix it?
Exactly. And maybe most importantly, what does this whole thing teach us about running these kinds of games? Or, well, not running them properly.
Okay, so setting the scene. It's this poker game. It's linked to someone called Adam.
Yeah, Adam's game, his logo was apparently on the table, felt.
But right away, the sources seem to suggest the core problem wasn't like someone cheating or a regular player trying to pull a fast one.
No, it seems more fundamental, like a problem with the game's governance, just how it was set up.
And it was built on a certain social dynamic, wasn't it?
Very much so. These players, a lot of them knew each other outside the game, maybe did business together.
So there was history.
Right, and that led to this culture where sometimes people played on credit, or you needed someone to vouch for you to even get in.
Yeah.
And some players, the ones who felt they were main components, they thought the rules were maybe a bit different for them.
Like they didn't need to
Hmm.
put up cash up front for every single session against certain others.
Yeah, that seems to be the idea. A bit of an informal hierarchy, maybe.
And this game didn't stay small.
Yeah,
The sources say it started pretty low stakes, 50 cents, a dollar.
something like that, yeah. But then bigger players came in, the whales or sharks, as some might call them,
And the stakes just shot up,
exploded, yeah. It became a big game pretty quickly.
which really makes you wonder.
What happens then, right? You take this loose structure based on knowing each other and small stakes and suddenly throw huge money at it.
The foundation probably wasn't ready for that weight.
It seems like it wasn't, no, the initial setup just wasn't built for that kind of pressure.
And that pressure point seems to be this one player, identified as 44.
Mm-hmm. Player 44.
The issue wasn't a bad beat story. It was simply they couldn't pay up. Or wouldn't. A big debt.
And that non-payment just ripped the cover off the game's lack of structure. Everyone started asking, wait a minute.
Who let 44 play for that much?
Exactly. Who approved the chips? Who was checking if they could actually cover potential losses?
Did they have any systems for this?
Well, they talked about systems. The conversations mentioned things like escrow.
Okay, like holding money with a third party.
Yeah, a trusted person holds the funds. And they also talked about hard vouching.
Which sounds more serious than just saying, he's okay.
Much more serious. A hard vouch, as it's described, means you, the voucher, are on the hook financially. If the player you vouch for can't pay, you have to cover it. It's not just a character reference.
But with 44, these systems didn't work. Or weren't used.
Seems like they tried, or at least discussed trying. There were efforts, over hours apparently, to get 44 to put money in escrow. Maybe with Adam? Nothing. The transcript suggests 44 was just unresponsive, avoiding it. And then you hear these other claims swirling around that maybe 44 had a history of being slow to pay debts.
Oh, really?
Yeah, allegedly owed money elsewhere to Adam, maybe a bookie, even someone who won a contest. Adds another layer,
Definitely. So the key takeaway here is the lack of a solid process for this specific game.
That's what the sources really hammer home. Unlike some previous games these people might have played in, this one didn't have a central ledger.
No spreadsheet tracking who's in for what, who owes who.
Apparently not. No dedicated group chat just for managing the money side, the buy-ins, the settlements, and maybe no single person who was clearly, consistently the game runner. There's even a mention that Adam, whose name was sort of on the game, was asleep when some of this was hitting the fan.
So no captain steering the ship when the storm hit.
Seems like it. Which led to total confusion when 44's debt landed. Who picks up the tab?
And that's when the blame game starts.
Oh, yeah. The sources show fingers pointing in different directions.
And one person who felt unfairly targeted was Tommy.
Right. A lot of the transcript focuses on his perspective. He seemed quite upset.
What was his side of it?
Well, Tommy felt that some people, not necessarily the main guys like Bluebeard or Vig, he clarifies that later, but other people were basically telling him he needed to cover 44's debt.
But he didn't feel responsible.
He argues strongly he wasn't owning the game. He says his role was very specific, He only had that kind of decision-making power or financial responsibility if he hard vouched for someone.
Did he hard vouch for 44?
No, he's clear he didn't. He gives an example where he did hard vouch for another player, Sniper Sim, the second time she played. He explicitly said then, okay, her action is on me, but not 44's.
Okay, that's a clear distinction.
And he also mentions, that he'd been putting his own money into the game in other ways, like free-rolling some players in previous weeks.
Giving them free chips or covering small losses?
Something like that, yeah. Kind of building goodwill, maybe, but definitely putting his own cash on the line already.
But he sounds pretty frustrated beyond just the money.
He does. He talks about the feel of the game, the high stakes, how it sometimes seemed to stop when he was winning big.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, he uses some really strong words, feeling like he was maybe the fish, the target, even describes it feeling like rape for money at one point. Very intense.
Wow. But despite feeling possibly set up, he's still considered paying.
It seems that way.
Huh.
He links potentially covering the loss, even though he felt wronged, to protecting his reputation, his honorability, as he puts it. In that world, that social and business circle, reputation is huge.
So a mix of anger and trying to protect his standing. What did others think?
Other perspectives were floating around too. Some felt, maybe it wasn't fair to expect every player to know who was solid for credit and who wasn't.
Blaming the system? Or lack thereof?
Yeah, blaming maybe inexperience in running a game that big, or just the simple fact there wasn't a clear manager. Seeing it less as one person's fault and more just the way things unfolded because of that missing structure. A function of how things played out was one phrase used.
So a lot of confusion, frustration. Did they ever figure out how to handle the debt?
It seems they reached some kind of resolution, at least according to the transcript. There was a turning point.
What happened?
Key figures, specifically the names mentioned, are Bluebeard, Vig, and Storm. They apparently stepped up during the discussions.
Okay.
The transcript suggests they basically agreed, look, going forward, this debt, it's on us. They decided to cover it collectively.
Ah, so they took responsibility as a group.
That seems to be the outcome. And because these were influential figures, them taking responsibility seemed to resolve the immediate crisis.
Took the heat off Tommy, presumably.
Yeah, the sense is the debt issue seems to be resolved in terms of who has to pay it back now. The burden's shifted.
And we know who was actually owed money. The winners.
The sources list them out, yeah. Man of the Vig, Bluebeard, Blitzy, Storm, Sniper, Free Agent, Brits Papa, Man of the Pig, Alex, Tapper, Cash, and HPK. Quite a few people waiting to get paid.
So that shift from blaming individuals to a group of organizers or leaders stepping up, that's significant.
It really is. It shows how these informal setups can sometimes, maybe awkwardly, find a way to fix themselves when things get serious, even if it's messy getting there.
Stepping back then, this whole saga feels like a perfect example of what happens when informal rules meet big money.
Absolutely, a stark case study. That chaotic outcome just screams how important clear roles are. Who's the manager? Who tracks the money?
And consistent processes. Like, how do we handle credit? How do we check people out?
Right. And it's interesting because the sources mentions some previous games this crowd played in did have more structure. Ledgers, group chats.
So why not this time?
Well, apparently those structured games ran into other problems, disagreements about buy-in caps, things like that. It shows even putting rules in place isn't foolproof if people don't agree on them or stick to them.
So where does this leave things for future games?
Uncertain, maybe. Tommy says point blank he's done playing in these kinds of games.
Can't blame him after that.
But others might continue. He does say you need honorable people running it. And he even suggests maybe they need something more formal for credit, like casino markers.
Moving towards a more professional setup.
Potentially. What this whole thing really throws into sharp relief is that tension, right? Between relying on friendships and assumed trust and the cold, hard need for clear, formal rules when the stakes get high or new people enter the mix.
You can feel that tension in the discussions described.
Totally. The frustration, people getting defensive, even accusations flying around stuff about content farming during the arguments. It got heated.
Okay, so let's wrap this deep dive up. We've looked at this unpaid debt in a private poker game. It caused a lot of chaos, mostly because the game grew too big, too fast for its informal setup.
Right. The rules weren't clear, management was lacking.
And after a lot of heated talk about who was responsible, it seems a core group eventually stepped up to cover the loss.
Highlighting just how tough it is when those informal deals break down under real pressure.
And it really makes you, the listener, think about similar spots in your own life, doesn't it?
For sure. Group projects, even family stuff, where you're just assuming everyone's on the same page, relying on unwritten rules or trust.
What happens if things change suddenly? Stakes go up, someone new joins who doesn't know the rules.
Could get complicated fast.
So the final thought to leave you with, when you don't have formal rules to fall back on, what's that idea of honorability really worth? And ultimately, who pays the price when how things are run is just unclear?